The truth is, we have to understand that you cannot reason with people like this. And it's very rare that you teach somebody out of their religion. And this is a religion. And so to try to talk these people down doesn't work. All they know is that you're a racist and that's all you're going to get. So the idea is not to try to have a dialogue with them about these sorts of issues. You have to just shut down. But I think that we simply need to start telling people like this no. And the question is not, how do you stop them from calling you a racist on social media? You don't. That's what they're going to do. And it's time to start letting them do it and going on about our business and having our fellows around us, having our friends around us, and just making these sorts of people realize that screaming that you're a racist isn't going to get them what they want. They've learned that that strategy works, and so they're going to keep using it, and they're never going to consider that it might not be the most humane or even constructive way of doing things. But these are human beings, and all of us have that element. There's a Lord of the Flies element in these people, although they would never recognize it in themselves. And so we need to start telling them no. And I am working on how to get people to actually consider doing that, because I get at least 3 emails a day from people who are scared to death of the elect and understand that these demands don't make any sense and are destructive, but they need to keep their jobs or they don't want to get screamed at. They have children, etc. Nevertheless, something needs to be done because these people will not stop and they're not open to reason. I just think my analogy is with sharks. I'm told, I don't know if this is true, but I'm told that you can bop a shark on the nose. I do not mean violence against these people in any way, but with these sorts of people, I think if you just said, no, I'm not a racist, and I don't care whether you put it on Twitter or not, and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and keep looking them in the eye and don't apologize. If you do that enough with these people, they'll back down. But it has to be enough people doing it that a subconscious group awareness emerges among people like this, that just yelling dirty names is not going to change the world the way they're hoping.
Do you feel there, there is an objective way or an empirical way? You were saying you can't reason with certain people, which I think is true. But what are the factors that you point to say, you know what, Black America, which is a ridiculous abstraction to begin with, but is actually doing better than it was 50 years ago or 30 years ago? One of the curious facts of the past year or so, or since, yeah, I mean, it's basically a year since George Floyd, we have been, every interaction that has gone violent between cops and blacks has been shown on network news or and cable news and everything ad nauseum. Yet the larger numbers don't seem to have changed very much over the past decade or even 15 years of the number of police killings of blacks, unarmed blacks or armed blacks, or white, unarmed whites, armed whites, etc. What are the things that you point to make a case for those who are looking for, some kind of data to suggest, what, things are actually better than the way that we talk about them?
Well, I think one thing that's very important is to talk about just the whole police issue in general, as you just did, because one of the driving factor in the idea that it remains a tragedy to be Black in the United States is the relationship between the cops and particularly young Black men. And I don't want to sound like one of these people who's always railing at the mainstream media for having sinister agendas, but we are really, really misled by the mainstream media's obsession with showing the deaths of young Black men while pretending that the same things don't happen to young white men too. So it's at the point where I personally see one of these horrible things in the news happening to a Black man. And I think to myself, I wonder how many white men that happened to over the past 5 years. And every single time it turns out that that's the case. It's just that those cases didn't make national news, and that includes George Floyd. There's a white boy named Tony Timpa was killed that exact same way a few years before him. And so there's that, talking about the cops, but also there's a very handy kind of mental picture that you might want to give people. If you took a George Wallace, or if you took one of these Dixiecrats from back in the day and you reanimated them now and had them, watch a laptop. I want to say watch TV, but I'm not sure what that is today.
Yeah.
Watch a laptop, for a couple of days, drive around. That kind of person would have to pull over and retch on the side of the highway, seeing how deeply Black people and Blackness have permeated all levels of this society. Strom Thurmond would be nauseated at the America that we have achieved today, even since his death, how much blacker the United States has gotten. And that matters. That very much matters. And nobody could possibly deny it. Anybody who says that all of the civil rights victories were basically negated because of what happened to George Floyd. One, are not thinking about the fact that that same thing happens to white people as well, and we simply don't hear about it. And also that the country has come a very, very long way. And, it's one of those things where I'm 55, so I don't feel old yet, but I know that 55 isn't young. I worry sometimes this is going to be a little bit, get off my lawn, but you have to say what you feel. There are people who are too young to understand what it used to be like, and I wasn't alive when it was really like what it was like, but I remember the 80s. I remember how openly racism could be expressed by some white people as late as the 80s. I remember not getting jobs openly in the summer because I was Black, and that's it. I remember two cases like that where I could tell that's what it was, and then asked later somebody who knew, and that's what it was. And yet the 80s compared to the 60s was like the second reel of The Wizard of Oz. Even then, there had been immense progress. But still, the way it is now, the browning of the culture, the very idea that everybody in the country is listening to young Black men bragging as their favorite music and loving the music as poetry and loving it the way people used to love Walt Whitman and Edna St. Vincent Millay. And that's not superficial. I mean, hip hop is a religion too. That's another creed. That being a religion that crosses races, these are unprecedented things. And yet you have a certain kind of person who wants to tell you that nothing significant has really changed since 1950 except manners. And that what shows that is George Floyd. No, that's highly childish reasoning. And unfortunately, the elect have such beautiful big words to express these things that it often sounds like they're saying something more sophisticated than they are.
What do you think undergirds what drives progress of the sort you're talking about? Because it's clearly happened. But why did it happen? And can we identify that and thus either speed it up or make sure that it doesn't get blocked or detoured?
We convinced the country that racism was a bad thing. A lot of very hard work was done in Congress. We tend to remember the people who did it for things like marches and speeches, but Martin Luther King and his comrades worked very closely with people in power to make change happen. I think we need to start thinking about that. Now we think of it as activism to chase people out of their jobs for not using the N-word the right way. That's not something that I think King would have quite understood. There was that. And then there was a social revolution in the 1960s that I don't think we fully understand yet, where a significant number of people learned to understand that being a bigot is wrong. I think sometimes people lack a little historical imagination. Go to a cocktail party in your mind in 1964. If you watched Mad Men, look at those people. How would they have felt about how you're supposed to feel about a Black person? They would have been all but unreachable. Something changed very quickly. And that is a wonderful thing too. And then Black people were able to do what we were capable of once segregation was no longer in the way, once people didn't openly hate us just by seeing our faces as often as they had. We got to do what we can do. Now, there are still some obstacles. There is an inner city problem, as we used to call it. The drug wars, that was a problem. There are things that we need to get over. But the idea that America is all about despising Black people and murdering our Black bodies, that's fantasy. That's something from a comic book. And yet there are a great many brilliant people who are determined to make us think that we're supposed to base our whole lives on this cartoon vision designed for self-indulgence of both white and Black people, instead of actually creating change on the ground the way the people who made a life like mine possible did. I think we're dishonoring the ancestors at this point.
Well, we're going to leave it there. Been talking with John McWhorter, a linguist at Columbia University and the author most recently of Nasty Words, English, Nine Nasty Words, excuse me, English in the Gutter, Then, Now, and Forever.